So, what is emotional eating and why is it so important to break any negative habits associated around it? Well, the truth is that emotional eating is definitely not all bad. But in order to understand what's healthy and what's not so healthy, it's important to understand the two main types of emotional eating. The first of these includes emotional eating for enjoyment. And this is where you eat food simply for the way it makes you feel. It is where you eat food without attachment to it. It simply comforts you because of its flavor, its smell, its texture, and so forth. And I just want to stress that there is absolutely nothing wrong with eating food because it makes you feel good. That's what food is for, to enjoy and nourish your body. In fact, food is essentially the glue that binds many families in many cultures together. And being Italian, this is something I know best. Whenever my family and I get together, it's all about the food and being with the family as one unit. From buying it, to preparing it, to eating it, to even cleaning up after the meal, and even talking about it later on. Unfortunately, many of us no longer make the opportunity to have this sort of relationship with food as much as we should. The second type of emotional eating is eating for attachment. And this is where you eat because food acts or helps you to cope with daily stress, or more deeply, food acts as a distraction to unprocessed emotions, identification, or to provide satisfaction and or relief from the present moment, much of which has roots back to early childhood. As a result, you build an emotional attachment to food rather than eating for the sheer taste of food itself. And so unlike emotional eating for enjoyment, eating food in response to stress in your life or to fill a void isn't so healthy. The reality is that to be emotionally attached to food, you don't even have to be enjoying it. Instead, you just eat it because the food is providing you with relief from your current situation. When this is done for long enough, this food behavior becomes a habit. And in the end, eating no longer becomes about enjoying the pleasure of food, but rather as a vain attempt to fill that void that cannot be filled. In fact, there are many ways in which we often try to fill this void and satisfy an insatiable hunger, including doing things like smoking and drinking and incessant working, and even things like getting married or having kids or having an affair or doing an excessive cleaning. The list goes on and on and on. But by far the most common way is with food in the way of emotional eating, which, if you are not conscious about it, quickly turns into an addiction. But just like any addictive behavior, none of these things, including emotional eating, can ever fill this void, and as such fail to provide a sense of peace and contentment in the present moment. The only thing that does provide this and fill this void is a connection to our true self, but that's another whole lesson altogether. The primary difference between eating for enjoyment versus eating for attachment is just that. You eat more for the emotional satisfaction of food rather than for the attachment to a particular emotional belief, thought, or situation. Now, unfortunately, many of us who struggle with emotional eating have no real awareness of the fact that we may be eating for attachment. Or even if you are aware that you may be using food for attachment, you still find it hard to break the habit. And part of the reason for this is because it can often be difficult to distinguish between the true physiological needs of your body, feelings, and the psychological wants of your mind. In other words, your thoughts. And a major reason for this is because many of us are living increasingly busy and stressful lives. This busyness means that we are less inclined to eat mindfully, and as a result, often fail to pay attention to our body's vital signs and cues to what we need from moment to moment. Increased stress also results in fluctuations in our blood sugar levels, which lead to exhaustion and ravenous junk food cravings. And so between your body releasing hormones that automatically stimulate your appetite and set off cravings for fattening foods, and your mind wanting to eat for emotional satisfaction, including distraction, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between the two. Obviously, it makes getting on top of emotional eating all that much harder too, because it's not as easy as simply disidentifying from your mind and trying to listen to what your body wants and needs to be healthy. In order to break any unhealthy emotional eating habit or food addiction, otherwise referred to as eating for attachment, you can follow these steps. The first step is to change your relationship with food. Now, I say that because it's one thing to eat food for nutrition and pleasure, but food can also be used as a substitute or distraction from whatever else is going on. And if this is the case, then you need to change your relationship with food. And you can do this by changing your relationship with yourself. This, of course, comes about by becoming increasingly aware of who you really are. To do this, it helps to realize that your mind is also the voice of your cravings and or addiction, and not who you are or what you want or need. Now, this may be hard to do initially because you have identified with it for quite potentially your whole life, but it is the only way to break emotional eating patterns. The key is just to try and witness your mind, which is always wanting, much in the same way as you are aware that your mind is thinking about these words that you are hearing come out of my mouth right now. And to make the process easier, it's a good idea to give your voice a name. By giving your voice a name, you are more easily able to step back and disidentify from your mind, whilst at the same time remaining witness to it. For example, I might call my voice Mitch, but you can make up whatever name you want. Whatever you do, don't try to beat your voice in a verbal argument, because it will always win. And that's because the compulsion overrides what you know rationally. Instead, the only way to beat it is simply to become conscious of it. And we do that by feeling and embracing your true self, and by becoming witness to that voice of addiction. And you can use the higher power that is your true self to override its commands. So as you witness what this voice is saying, simply go in and discern what you believe to be true or not. For example, your voice may be telling you that you really need this chocolate. Cadbury's, one of my favorites. So stop and ask yourself, is this true? Does my body really need this chocolate? Probably not. In doing this, realize that it will take some practice, but soon enough, you will wake up to the lies you've not only been telling yourself, but also which you've quite possibly believed for such a long time. With that said, however, don't be afraid of not listening to your voice. To facilitate this process, it is essential that you also let go of any subconscious attachment to needing the voice to keep your weight under control, just generally to keep you eating healthy, etc. I say that because unfortunately, many of us believe that if we disengage or ignore our voice, that our weight will spiral out of control, or that we will fall out of shape, because that's the very thing which forces us to remain disciplined in the first place. However, in reality, it's untrue, because it's our desire to be whole and ourself that does that. So unless we deal with our voice of addiction, we will always find ourselves being a slave to whatever it wants. So the key is to work on being happy. This is because the more aware you become, the more fulfilled you become with the present moment, and the less you'll need to turn to food for distraction or satisfaction, which is also referred to as eating for attachment. It's also important to remember the best tool is always awareness. That's because once you become truly aware of something, then the power that that once had on you is lost. The more aware you become of negative food behaviors, the more they lose their hold on you. So remember to practice becoming conscious of what you are about to eat and eat mindfully. How? Well, you can do this by taking a few breaths before you eat anything. Just sit with yourself for a moment. And also you can do it by becoming fully conscious of the food behavior before you actually consume what it is you're going to eat. And as you do so, all that power of that addictive behavior is lost. And you should actually refrain from acting out on your internal trigger to eat. Also know that if despite becoming aware of what you are doing, the compulsive urge to eat is simply too strong to resist, and you do end up eating whatever it is, then don't get down on yourself, but rather just learn from it for next time you are faced with a similar situation. By taking this approach and doing this, you will eventually find that your emotional eating pattern and addictive food behaviors will slowly lose their hold and lose their grip and inevitably disappear. Just remember that patience is the key here. You can also ask questions to ensure that your mind doesn't try to trick you into the same behavioral patterns again, because it will, there's no doubt about it. For example, when you feel hungry, ask yourself, is this really what I want or need? Or will it just hinder my ability to manage a healthy weight or to be healthy, etc., etc.? Then just take a few deep breaths and listen, because you will find more often than not, it's your mind which is hungry and not your body. So if you pause for a few seconds before you eat, then your body will let you know if that's what it really wants. And you'll find that instead of being a problem for you, food will become your teacher. Also, remember, the key to successfully curbing addictions and cravings lies in your ability to live true and trust that your body knows what it wants and needs. As you do this, you'll begin to crave more wholesome and more nutritious foods. So this is how you refrain from emotional eating for attachment. But if you are still finding it difficult to stop eating, then it may be a good idea to try taking a natural, and I say natural, appetite suppressant, which can aid in decreasing appetite and increasing feelings of satiety until you do adopt healthier eating patterns. So, do you use food for emotional attachment as opposed to just for the enjoyment of food itself?
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to learn more about the other essential attributes of staying in your best shape. And until next time, watch what you chew, do what you need to do, and always live true.